Hello and welcome to the Carolina Panthers Football in My Mind podcast. I'm your host, Luke Farber. And what is in my mind today? Well, it's 2025 season rolling around. We're starting to get free agency going, re-signed Andy Dalton already. So I'm just getting primed for the new year, ready to get it going. And before we do that, I want to take a look back at 2024. We can see the whys and the hows of what was made of our season, and we'll take it back to the beginning of 2024 so we can look at our past and see if we can see where the future is heading. But what was the start of 2024 looking like? Well, it started with the hiring of Coach Canales and Dan Morgan as the GM. Obviously, the previous regime with Frank Reich and Scott Fitterer, people were just not on the same page. You could tell from the coach to the GM to the players to the staff, everything. There were just too many cooks in the kitchen, and everybody wanted to go their own direction, it seemed. So the fact that we failed epically was not too surprising for us. And what I think, especially looking back on the season, is that Coach Canales and GM Dan Morgan are definitely much more on the same page. And, they like to talk about alignment. Well, hey, they are aligned. And in my personal life, I can attest to you before. It's like when you have your body, mind, and soul heading in the same direction, it's just a lot easier to achieve what you want to achieve. So one thing that made them aligned as far as philosophy wise was the time that they spent together in Seattle under Pete Carroll. And living here in Tacoma, Washington, I've had an up close look at the Seahawks, especially in the Pete Carroll era. And as much as I hated it, and I did, they were a fantastic football team. And part of the reason why they were a great football team is that they were able to draft guys that they knew they wanted, and they knew how to coach them up. So the draft and develop model was in a full go in Seattle, and they did it just as well, if not better than anybody else. And so having two guys that came from that, was born from that system, basically. Morgan did some other jobs for, he worked for the Bills as well, and other things. So but Canales' pro career started in Seattle after he had worked with Pete Carroll at USC. So having those guys be privy to that system of organization, I think bodes really well for the Panthers, because Seahawks never really had a down year with Carroll as their coach. And honestly, I was shocked when they got rid of him. And I think a lot of people up here were shocked when they got rid of him. But I think that is the first thing in my mind when it comes to coach and GM and the hiring, is that they are on the same page. They know what they want. They want the same things, and they're able to go out and get them. And that started with free agency last year. And you could tell, bringing in the offensive guards that we brought in, Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis, big time, good players, high priced free agents. But with how poor the offensive line play had been the year before, and really for the past 5+ years, it was vital to solidify that offensive line, to give your young quarterback a chance to succeed, give you a chance to run the ball and take pressure off of him. So those were the big key free agent signings, and really set the tone for who the team was going to be this year and who the team will be going forward. I love to hear Demo talk about the line of scrimmage and winning the line of scrimmage. And, it was very obvious from the Super Bowl this last year, where the Chiefs just got manhandled, is that if you win the line of, excuse me, if you win the line of scrimmage in a dominant fashion, you're going to win a lot of games. So if we can continue to solidify that offensive line and really rebuild the defensive line, obviously, because spending our resources on the offensive side of the ball this last year, our defense took a hit, right? And of course, there were the injuries too, but we'll get to that. Other key free agent signings. Well, wide receiver David Moore, not a flashy guy, not a big time starter guy, but as a third, fourth, fifth receiver, he made a lot of nice catches down the stretch, a lot of first downs, a few touchdowns, just a solid, dependable, good route runner, good hands. And he did make an impact this year. Other good free agent signings we had on the defensive side of the ball were, our two stalwarts on the line, A'Shawn Robinson and Jadeveon Clowney. They both played well this season. Ashawn especially, I expected him to come in and be able to contribute against the run game right away. I underestimated his ability to affect the passer, but it's great that we have him under contract for another couple years. Same with Clowney. So those guys can come back and work together again for a second year, and hopefully we can add some fresh and talented bodies into the defensive line group and really take that up a notch. The other key free agent signing was Josie Jewell, especially with Shaq Thompson being lost for the season in the fourth game of the year. Obviously, Josie got hurt around the same time and missed a handful of games, which really hurt our defense again. But once he came back, he really made some plays, had a handful of sacks, a couple interceptions. The guy played good, solid inside linebacker, and he is obviously going to be the leader of that group moving forward with Shaq no longer in the building. Now, moving on to the draft, our key draftees. Our first round, obviously, we took the wide receiver Xavier Legette. Second round, a key move there was we traded with the Rams to get a second round pick this year. And, I love trading for future high picks. Obviously, you don't want to give up too much, but seeing as how we didn't have a second rounder this year, now having one, even though it's later, is crucial. So being able to get that second round pick this year in the trade with the Rams was vital. Taking Trevin Wallace, linebacker, in the third round was a nice one for us. JT Sanders, tight end, in the fourth round. And then obviously Jalen Coker, wide receiver, undrafted free agent. All of these guys played this year. All of them made impacts. Now, you could tell that they're all rookies. They have lots of growing and learning to do, but they're young, they're talented, and you can see the explosiveness, especially from Legette and Wallace in particular. Now, Coker had that long touchdown catch against Dallas, which he showed off his straight line speed, which I didn't know he had. And a lot of the catches he had this year, they were contested. They were over the middle, in traffic, shorter possession type routes. But when he ran away from the Dallas defense, that opened my eyes. We got a couple of good, young, talented wide receivers, and I'm excited to see what they can grow into, especially this next year. Now, JT Sanders, I really liked him coming out of the draft. I thought he was the second best tight end next to Brock Bowers last year. Now, Brock is on a whole different level, and there was reason why he was taken in the first half of the first round, and there was reason why Sanders was taken in the fourth round. Obviously, there was quite a gap between them. Now, Sanders, the one thing that he didn't do coming out, as far as his pre-draft process, is he didn't seem to be in the upper echelon with his athletic numbers, the 40, all that kind of stuff. And that doesn't usually tell the tale of the tape with a tight end, especially because so much of their position when it comes to running routes over the middle is feel, is body control, is boxing out like a power forward, like so many, like the Antonio Gates of the world. So I think he's got plenty of potential to round into a really good tight end. Will he be an upper echelon guy ever? I don't know if that's in his future, but if he puts in enough work and makes enough improvements, he's got a chance. So we'll see how that works out. So moving on to our season, what happened? Why did it turn out the way it turned out? And we can't look at our season this past year without looking at the injuries. At some point, at every point, let's just make it the first point. Let's get it out of the way. Everybody knows we were very injured last year. I mean, preseason injuries. One of our pass rushers that we signed in free agency, DJ Wanham from the Vikings, he was hurt in the offseason. Complications arose with his rehab and didn't make it back till mid-season. We had Jonathan Brooks, obviously, our second round draft pick running back. It was coming back from a torn ACL. He didn't come back until 2/3 of the way through the season. Dane Jackson, the corner that we had signed to start opposite JC Horn, injured preseason, didn't come back till mid-year. Sam Franklin Jr., our special team stud and captain, was hurt to start the year. Tommy Tremble, our starting tight end, was out. So obviously, before the season even started, we were behind the eight ball, especially on a young, incomplete roster. So what do? We get to the regular season, and our best defensive lineman goes out for the year in the first game, Derek Brown. Then Shaq Thompson, 3 games later, Miles Sanders, Adam Thielen, Austin Corbett, starters at key positions: center, middle linebacker, defensive tackle, wide receiver, running back, defensive end, all of these key positions, starters gone, sometimes for the season, sometimes just for a good chunk of it. So we were behind the eight ball as a team that was limited talent wise and depth wise in its roster. In fact, that was my main concern coming into the year. So I thought the frontline guys were solid, but the backups were young and unproven. And once our frontline guys got hurt, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where we were undermanned anyway, it was just a really tough uphill battle to compete against those injuries. I mean, by week 4, all of our captains were not on the field. Now, one of them had been benched in Bryce Young, but Derek Brown, Shaq Thompson, Sam Franklin Jr., all out. So if you don't have all of your starting captains on the field, in fact, you didn't have any of them on the field, it's going to be hard to have success. So how did the season really go? Well, we know we started 0-2, and it looked really, really bad, especially offensively, and Bryce got benched. And then, of course, Dalton comes in Vegas, and we have a breakout game, score over 30, the offense is clicking, and it's like, oh, look, Bryce was the problem, which, you know, obviously Dalton only went 1-4. So won that first game and then tapered off until he unfortunately got in a car accident and got hurt. But obviously, with the challenges we had defensively, there were enough weapons offensively to make some hay. And we saw that once Dalton came in. And obviously, we didn't see it last year with Bryce, and we didn't see it in the first 2 games with Bryce. Now, I always thought he would get back on the field because, you know, I didn't expect to see a ton out of Dalton for the year once he got in. That first game, you know, kind of shocked me. And, you know, I kind of figured it would continue for a little while. It obviously didn't. But the nice thing is that when Bryce did get his chance to get back in there, he started to look like a starting NFL quarterback. He was making strides every week. And that's what we wanted to see. I mean, that was really my preseason goal for this team was, you know, we want to see steady improvement. We want to see improvement from the quarterback. We want to see it gel, and we want to be playing better the second half than we were the first half. And that did happen, luckily. Of course, those first few weeks when Bryce played so bad and we got benched, that is a lot of turmoil. That is a lot of upheaval. That is a lot of drama to go through as an athlete, as a franchise. And the fact that the Panthers were able to rebound the second half of the season, especially Bryce, play well and play better. I mean, that is exactly what we wanted to see as far as that is concerned. Obviously, the 5-12 record is not what we want to see, and we want to continue that improvement this next year and push to make a playoff spot. Now, let's move on and kind of look at each position group, kind of like we did during the season, and see where we were in 2024 and where we are now in 2025. Like we always did during the season, we're going to start with the offensive line because they're the one that set the tone offensively. And without them, Bryce, Chuba, anybody on offense is not going to be able to have success. So we brought in the 2 guards. We brought in Hunt and Lewis, like we talked about before, and they really solidified the offensive line. Was able that along with coaching and play calling, I believe, was able to get Big Ick on the left side to play a lot better and really solidify the entire offensive line. Now, when Corbett got hurt, our starting center in the first half of the year, Cade Mays stepped in for him, and there was a bit of a drop off there. It took a handful of games for Mays to really kind of get up to speed and start playing a little bit better. But the nice thing is that by the end of the season, he really had solidified that position. And that's another thing, you know, with the salary cap and young players, old players, you have to make decisions on who to keep and who not to. And his play down the stretch gave us a cheaper ability for a starting center than Austin Corbett. Now, we love Corbett, but he's been on the team for a few years now, and he's had a couple season-ending injuries. And that's not a good sign, especially as a guy who's getting older. So if I had to guess, we're probably going to keep Mays and keep him as the starter, and Corbett will be moving on, but we'll see how that goes. Now, obviously, Corbett is a free agent. Brady Christensen, a key backup, probably our number one backup at guard and tackle, is a free agent. And then Cade Mays was a restricted free agent, but I just saw today that we offered him, so he'll be sticking around. It'll be interesting to see if Brady Christensen and Austin Corbett stick around, and if we can learn anything from the Eagles and their constant allocating assets to their offensive and defensive line, is that we should never be satisfied with how our lines are playing. We should always be looking for big, strong, athletic bodies who can play on the lines. I mean, that should be a priority in every draft and every free agent class. I actually really wanted us to draft Jackson Powers Johnson, the center from Oregon last year, in the second round. Obviously, that didn't happen, but Mays was able to come in and play really well as a younger player. So we'll see how the offensive line progresses through the offseason. Now we can move on to quarterback, which, everybody loves, but Bryce showed vast improvements after returning from being benched, and what we want to see this year is we want to see him continue to grow. We want to see more pieces added around him as far as playmakers so that he can have a little bit more optionality in who to throw to and the ability to make explosive plays. We also want to continue to run the ball. I think sometimes last year, and a lot of coaches can do this, is they fall in love a little bit too much with the pass game and don't run the ball enough. Now, that is still our strength on offense, is running the ball. We got Chuba. Unfortunately, we won't have Jonathan Brooks this year. It'll remains to be seen if Miles Sanders will be back, but I would not be surprised to see them draft another running back. Hopefully, I don't see it coming high, but we'll see. Anyway, now what we talked about before is, can Bryce avoid his sophomore slump? I know this will be his third year in the NFL, but at the end of the year, he really started to play well for the first time in his NFL career, short, although it is. But every time somebody figures something out and, takes a step, the league is going to study you. The league is going to figure out what you do well, and they're going to take it away. So can you adjust? Can you continue to mature your game and really become a great upper echelon type quarterback? Those are the type of steps we want to see from Bryce this year. Absolutely. Now, we got Dalton re-signed already, which is fantastic. Obviously, he and Bryce have a great relationship. We realized last year that, Dalton, he isn't what he was at the beginning of his career. And, he's probably not a guy who's going to be able to take over in week 3 and lead you to the playoffs. As we improve the roster, who knows? Maybe he will. But he is a guy that can come in and spell Bryce and be that veteran, steady hand. If there's an injury for a game or two, he can win a game or two. And he's going to provide steady backup and presence in the locker room. And obviously he and Bryce have a great rapport. So as Demo said, they didn't want to break that up, and why would you? So I love that signing. Our third string, Jack Plummer, who was undrafted last year, it remains to be seen if he'll stay in that role. We didn't get to see him at all last year, but that's a good thing. You don't want to see your third string quarterback in an actual game. In the last preseason game, he played pretty well. So we'll see if that evolves, if we pick up, a different quarterback in the draft or unrestricted free agent. I'm sure that we'll bring in other guys to push him, but will he remain that third string? We'll see. Hey, Chuba's the man. Chuba is a Pro Bowler. Don't get it twisted. He was 15th in the league in scrimmage yards, 8th in rush yards, and he missed the last 2 games of the season because of injury. He had almost 1,400 scrimmage yards, 11 TDs, and 3 fumbles lost. Obviously, you don't want the fumbles, but the 11 touchdowns, it's a breakout season for him, the 1,400 yards and 4.8 per carry. Fantastic. Now, I would love to see him keep getting fed the ball as much as possible next year. He is the bunny that makes this engine go. So, Chuba, keep on pounding, baby. Jonathan Brooks, our second round pick from this last year, he came back halfway through the season from his torn ACL in college and really looked good. I mean, you could tell why they took him in the second round, even though he was injured. his movement skills, his power, his balance, his agility, his speed. Honestly, in the short glimpse that I got of him, you can tell that he's just got juice and movement skills that Chuba doesn't. Now, Chuba is a fantastic back, good straight line runner, has good one cut ability, jump cuts here and there. But he is not on the upper echelon as far as his agility, side to side, and keeping with his speed. So that is something that Brooks showed that Chuba just doesn't quite have. Unfortunately, Brooks tore his ACL again. And so I don't expect to see him at all this year. I think, especially with him coming back and then tearing the same ACL after just 3-4 games, that's going to be a hard sell, I think, not only for him, but for the medical staff, especially if they bring him back. And just kind of like last year, it's like you wanted to get his feet wet in the NFL, but at that point in the season, we weren't going to make the playoffs. There was no point in, pushing him to do something he couldn't do. And will they be more cautious with him this year, second time around? I probably would be, but I don't know. I'm not, a doctor. I'm not a part of the medical staff. I'm not a sports psychologist, but however they handle Brooks, I hope they do it correctly. And, would love to see him once he gets back from his injury, because just the little bit he showed, he looks legit. So I want to see him out there pounding the rock. Miles Sanders, it'll be interesting to see if he comes back on the team this year, just because he signed a decent free agent contract a couple of years ago and then obviously lost out on the starting job to Chuba. But he's an intense player. He's a good teammate. He's a solid locker room guy. And even though he was injured for most of the year, he was able to come back and make it back for the last game of the year as a veteran for a game that didn't count. And he was key in that victory in Atlanta. He had 116 scrimmage yards and 2 touchdowns. So will he be back? Will they release him? It's yet to be seen. Obviously, I really like Blackshear. Brown showed some good things. So it'll be interesting to see how that room shakes out for this year. But it's a very solid room. It was solid last year. It's solid this year. So we'll see how it progresses. Now at our wide receiver position, we had old reliable Adam Thielen with 48 catches, 615 yards, 5 touchdowns. And his injury limited him to only 10 games. So he's still old reliable. And we saw a couple different times, he's still got some speed to burn now. So having him back and being a security blanket for Bryce is key. Now, we already mentioned the 2 rookies, and Demo and his opening press conference for the year was very praising of those 2 guys and talking about their futures and knowing that we're solid, as far as young guys at the position. Leggett had 49 catches for 497 yards and 4 touchdowns, and Coker had 32 catches for 478 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, Leggett struggled a lot more with inconsistencies. He was nagged by injuries all year, wrist, shoulder, hip, but he was still out there most every week, giving it his all. And of course, you saw in the second half of the season when he hit that rookie wall, he started to have a lot of drops, which was never his MO in college. So as kind of discouraging as that was to see at the moment, especially when he dropped the potential game-winning touchdown against the Eagles in Philadelphia with, less than a minute to go, it was discouraging. It was frustrating, but I think those struggles and the playing time and hopefully being able to heal up this offseason and have a normal offseason without the draft process is really going to enable him to take the next step next year, because we saw his explosiveness. I mean, I haven't seen too many big guys that can move like that. I mean, just once he hits his stride, whether he's going horizontal or vertical, man, you better get out of the way. He's not as big as DK Metcalf, but I feel like he can run you over just the same. Anyway, Coker, undrafted free agent, for him to come in and do what he did was amazing. I think our young receiver core with these guys at its head is in good position. I still would love to see him draft another guy. I mean, wide receiver, especially in today's NFL, is a position group that you cannot have enough studs at, right? We saw that with the Eagles, with Devontae Smith, AJ Brown, Jahan Dotson. Like, if you can have 3-4 guys deep that are legit 1As, 2As, like, then you're going to be able to overwhelm most secondaries. And especially if you can run the ball too, like we saw with Saquon, the sky is the limit for your offense. So anyway, Moore was a key contributor as well, like I talked about before, but he is the only free agent among our wide receiver group. So it'll be interesting to see if he is brought back, if anyone else is brought in as far as free agent wide receivers. Of course, my first inclination all year, I was like, oh, T. Higgins. Let's get T. Higgins. After this year, it's like, I don't know if we necessarily need to get T. Higgins, especially because that is going to be a huge chunk of money that we probably need to spend on our defense. And so there's obviously McMillan out of Arizona, which could be a potential with our top 10 pick in the draft this year. But also, we're looking for defense as well. And Demo was talking playmakers. We need playmakers at every level on both sides of the ball. So who knows where that pick's going to go, but it'll be interesting to see who they bring in, because they have to bring in, more competition and better athletes at that position for our offense really to take the next step. All right, tight end. We talked about Sanders, the rookie, a little bit. He definitely led the way with our tight ends this year. 33 catches, 342 yards, only 1 touchdown. Like we were saying before, he's got potential, but we'll see. Everybody else is a free agent. Tommy Tremble, Ian Thomas, Devon Sullivan. Now, those guys have been on the roster or on practice squad or whatnot for a long time now. Tommy being the least experienced and probably most athletically gifted. I know Demo said they were going to let him test the free agent market this year. I would love to see him back because I think he's got potential to evolve. However, if they're making that decision, it's not for no reason. They see potential in him as well, but even that no-look touchdown pass he caught from Bryce in the season finale, he had to double clutch it. He definitely has some limitations as a receiving tight end. So we'll see. There's definitely going to be plenty of competition brought into that room. And that's another way we could go with that number 8 overall pick. Watching the playoffs this year, the college football playoff, Penn State tight end, I can't remember his name, but he was a beast. And definitely reminds me of a Brock Bowers-esque type player. He's not Bowers, obviously, but the size, the physicality, the ability to catch the ball and to run routes was obvious. And just the way the guy moves is different. So that's another potential spot that we could go with that number 8 overall pick, I think. So obviously we'll definitely bring in bodies to fill out the roster spots, if nothing else. JT's obviously in the pole position now, but we'll see how that goes as free agency and the draft move along. All right, moving on to defense now. Starting with the defensive line, obviously the Derek Brown injury, which we've talked about, was big, and getting him back is big because, Pro Bowl, all-pro type defensive tackle that he is, it's hard to have success when you don't have your best player, especially when he's a defensive lineman. Then we got A'Shawn, like we talked about before. He had 5.5 sacks and 8 tackles for loss. Clowney with another 5.5 sacks and 9 tackles for loss. Those are the stalwarts. They're going to be there. And it'll be interesting to see who on the current roster steps up, because we don't have any notable free agents on the D-line, and see if Wanham with a full offseason and full season of health can contribute more, and who else they're going to bring in. Obviously, everybody's been talking about Abdul Carter from Penn State, their pass rusher, kind of the consensus from what I've heard, top pass rusher in the draft this year as a potential with that number 8 pick. But top pass rushers at number 8, that's kind of late for them, especially in a draft that only has maybe 2 potential top quarterback picks in the top 10, and they might even fall out. Who knows? We'll see. So anyway, we obviously need to upgrade the defensive line as well as the entire defense. Anybody watched us play last year, we were last in the NFL in points allowed, and we were last in the NFL in rush defense. In fact, we gave up over 600 more rushing yards than the 31st team for the entire season. So that needs to improve a lot. Another thing that will help that would be the linebacker play. And obviously, Shaq Thompson, all-time great Panther linebacker, was injured out for the year for the second straight year and was just horrible to see. Obviously, that started to put us in a rough spot in linebacker. And I mean, we were on to our fifth, sixth string green dot linebacker by the end of the year. So it was tough with that. And we've already decided not to have Shaq back, which, unfortunately kind of saw coming, just because being an older player and having a couple of season ending injuries back to back and having a young player that you might want to put into a position to grow into a starting role and perhaps become that next great Panthers linebacker. They decided to let him go, and that was tough. Shaq, we love you, man. Thank you so much for all the years, all the sacrifice, all the effort. It must have been tough to come in 2015, your rookie year, go to the Super Bowl, and then only make the playoffs one more time in your Carolina tenure, and especially the last few years just having a rough go of it. But I'll never forget you, man. You're one of the greatest impact Panther linebackers of all time. All the hard hits, takeaways, the leadership ability. I can't wait to see you back as a retiring Panther. See you in the building around all the other alums. We love you. We wish you good luck. We want you to do well, except if it's going to hurt the Panthers. So thank you, Shaq. Take care, buddy. Anyway, Josey Jewell was our offseason acquisition. We already talked about him, and his injury kind of forced Trevin Wallace into that green dot responsibility, our third round pick. We talked about him a little bit. Man, we saw some explosive plays from him this year, but we also saw some rookie mistakes. So can he take that next step? Because, at least for now, you kind of assume that he'll step into one of those starting inside linebacker roles with Josey Jewell. But of course, and what does NFL stand for? Not for long. So you can't assume anything. And they're definitely going to bring in more competition at that spot. So we'll see how it goes. All right, moving on to DB. We really, really struggled with communication in the secondary all year long. Way, way, way too many big plays. Saw receivers, tight ends, backs running free through the secondary so often. I mean, even just thinking back to that Cincinnati game, I remember we go down and score to start the game, and then it just takes a couple of plays for Joe Burrow to find a completely uncovered tight end, nobody within 5 to 10 yards of him when he walks in for the touchdown. And you just can't win many games when you give up that many big uncontested big plays. I mean, at least if you're going to give up a big play, have some coverage around or something. Anyway, JC did make his first Pro Bowl. Congrats on staying healthy, JC. I mean, that's the biggest thing. We all know how talented you are. We all know how good you can play when you're on the field. You just haven't been able to be on the field. So congrats to JC for staying healthy and making his first Pro Bowl. Even when I saw him play, though, this year, I didn't think it was his best football. So, and I mean, with a secondary and a defensive unit that struggled so much like ours did this last year, it's hard for anybody to have a great year. So, I mean, we're looking for additions, not only as far as personnel is concerned, but we're just looking for a step up in play, in communication across the entire defense, but especially the secondary. Now, Mike Jackson, who we brought in from Seattle, traded for, made some good plays, but he also gave up a lot too. So there was kind of a lot of feast or famine with him, but the feast was looking pretty good. So if he can gain a little bit more consistency, we'll see if he can take the next step and become a little bit better of a player. It'll be interesting to see who else they bring in as well, because, the defense is going to have a major overhaul. Everybody knows that. Xavier X at the safety spot was solid. Again, he has improved every year since he's been on the roster. The first year we signed him, I wasn't too enthused, but he has really become solid back there. But I know they're going to let him test the free agent market too. So we may be in the market for 2 new safeties again. So we'll see how all that shakes out. Now, our free agents to be, we got Mike Jackson, Caleb Farley, who was a high first round pick a few years ago before he had kind of some tragic events that took him out of football for a little bit. And I would love to see him back and see if we can bring that talent out of him. That would be great. X is also a free agent, Sam Franklin Jr. Now, Sam rarely plays actually on defense. He's mostly a special teams guy, but he's one of the best special teams guy in the league. He's also an attitude guy. He's a chirper. Love to see him out there laying the wood and letting people know about it. So, Sam, we want you back, buddy. So, as far as the special teams is concerned, we got Johnny Hecker, good punter, passer, tackler. He's solid all around. Pinheiro, he's one of the most accurate field goal kickers of all time. Yeah, he was slightly down this last year. He made 22 of 26 field goals and 33 of 35 extra points, which honestly, the 22 of 26, that's not horrible. It's obviously not perfect, but I think the thing that stands out in our minds is there were a couple of key misses, both in the extra points and both in the field goals, which is something that we weren't used to with Eddie. And it's hard to see when you see those misses at key times, even if they're the only misses all year, right? And Eddie also wants to get paid. So I know that Demo is going to let him test the free agent market. I wouldn't. Honestly, we've been a bit spoiled in Panthers history, going from John Casey to Graham Gano and Eddie Pinheiro. But I remember the Joey Sly years, and I also watch around the league. And if you don't have a kicker that you can rely on in non-clutch times, you're going to lose games. It's a fact. So I really think a good, accurate, solid field goal kicker cannot be taken for granted. And if we don't sign him back after he tests free agent, it'll be really interesting to see who we bring in, because that can make or break a few games a year. You never know. And a few games a year can be the difference between a playoff berth and not. So it'd be interesting to see, especially because both of those guys are free agents. And will one of them be back? Will both of them be back? Will none of them be back? I like our special teams kickers. I think they should be both back, but nobody really listens to me, so that's all good. Anyway, looking forward to our general free agency outlook, we are 19th in cap space. We got 20 million to spend, so that's not a huge amount. And really, we're at 19th, but I think there are only like 3 or 4 teams behind us that aren't in the negative. So we don't have a ton of money to spend, which is probably why we aren't going to make a huge splash this year. Probably why we couldn't trade for T. Higgins, even if we wanted to. Who knows? I am definitely not a capologist. I'm not well versed in that sort of thing. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But obviously, we're going to be adding to the defense. We're going to be adding to the depth. So I assume that we'll kind of try and go out and get a bunch of solid role players in free agency, which isn't splashy, it isn't sexy, but it's solid. It's what you need to be a winning team, a winning franchise, and it's what we need to take our game to the next level. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we do and how it sets us up for the draft. I love the draft. Can't wait to start digging into some of these prospects and looking at things and talking with you folks about it. I'm looking forward to having some off-season discussions with fans of different teams, people I know, good football fans. And hey, if you want a guest spot on the show, shoot me an email, shoot me a message, like, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. And we'll get this 2025 Panthers season going. Keep pounding.